Now, instead of talking only with the radio listeners in one market area, I talk to them in more than 1,000. Take what you do, what you most enjoy doing, and find a way to multiply it. You needn't hurry. A slow, steady growth is best. If you work at a salaried job, what is it about your work, some facet of your work, that can be developed into a multiplied service? What do you know that others need and want to know? What's your hobby? Think, but think with a pen and pad of paper. Keep paper with you or near you at all times. You'll want to start writing down your ideas. Remember, your rewards are now and must always be in proportion to your service. Find ways, good, solid, healthy ways to increase your service, and your increased rewards will take care of themselves. What percentage of the people do you believe have this service rewards idea straight in their minds? Would you say 1%? That might be a generous estimate. Yet how many people are familiar with the biblical statement, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap"? 95%? About that. How many people believe it's literally true in our lives? That is much more than a happy saying from the Bible. That's right, they don't think about it in those terms. But the unbreakable law it describes is at work every moment of every day of our lives, cause and effect. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. He worked all his life, but never had anything to show for it. You ever heard that comment? I have. As a youngster, I heard it often. He apparently achieved a kind of parity between what he was doing for a living and the living it was paying for. His service was limited, and it limited his income. It apparently satisfied him. He did nothing to change it. Our housekeeper once commented that her husband couldn't understand why, no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't get ahead financially. It turned out that he was a mechanic. He worked on one car at a time for 8 hours a day. How much can such work be worth? How much can each customer be charged? Then there's the overhead, the cost of doing business. By the time the mechanic is paid, it's true. It's going to be very difficult for him to get ahead financially. But he chose that line of work. And think of the things he chose not to do before he went to work as a mechanic. Sometimes he chose to drop out of school. He chose not to work out a plan that would result in his owning his own business. Not that that means he would have got ahead financially necessarily. He chose to take the path of least resistance every step of the way, and is apparently quite willing now to work as a mechanic. Mervyn Nyland was a mechanic also. He rebuilt engines, remember? And then began experimenting with ways to keep his hands clean and in good shape physically. Both our housekeeper's husband and Mervyn Nyland reap the harvest their sowing produces. One is poor, the other's a millionaire. I remember an old poem I read as a youngster, gobbling up books looking for answers. It began, "I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more." I don't remember the rest, but that's not important. What's important is that life will pay us for what we bargained for, and if we play for peanuts, we're going to have to eat peanuts. How can I multiply my service? How can I multiply my service to those I have chosen of my own free will to serve? That's my task, my responsibility. But I must remember that my rewards all the years of my life will be in exact proportion to my service. If my service is sharply limited, my income will be sharply limited. If I can expand and multiply my service, my harvest will be multiplied accordingly. Service rewards. That's the way it works. We can work with the system or against it, but it remains the same. And it's beautiful when we begin to work with it. It's limitless, really. We're the limiters. We're the governors on the system. If it's held back, we do the holding. Give the people what they want. Give them a quality product, and they'll buy from you. People have needs, and they have wants. Their needs are few. Their wants are limitless. Give them what they need or want, and they will reward you accordingly. Fail to give them what they need or want, and they'll put you out of business. Service rewards. No exceptions. A river or a goal? There are two categories of very successful people. There are those I call the river people, and those that might be labeled the gold people. River people are those fortunate few who find themselves born to perform a specific task. They're usually well aware of just what that task is while they're still quite young. They're not interested in doing anything else. They're born to spend their lives in great rivers of the most absorbing interest, and they throw themselves into those rivers wholly. Mozart and Leonardo da Vinci were river people. There are hundreds of thousands of river people living today, and they can be found in all fields. There are finest musicians and performers in all the arts. They're writers, scientists, lawmakers. They can be found in every profession. Dr. Al Roten, the brilliant microneurosurgeon at the University of Florida, comes to mind as I record this subject. He heads the teaching center, and he performs brilliant, life-saving surgical procedures. I saw a dozen or so physicians there from all over the world, sitting around a circular table, peering through powerful microscopes and operating on the brains of mice in order to perfect their skills in microneurosurgery. They use instruments specially designed for such fine work, tiny, delicate forceps, sutures so fine they're nearly invisible to the naked eye, and miniature scalpels. Their movements are barely perceptible as they work on nerves and tiny blood vessels. Dr. Roten can be seen in the halls of the hospital from early in the morning until very late at night. One Sunday afternoon we were taking a walk, and I asked him why he didn't have a high-priced practice in New York or Beverly Hills. He walked along in silence for a few minutes, then he said, "Where I get my satisfaction out of all this, Earl, is knowing that somewhere in the world every day people are getting better medicine, better surgery, because of what we're doing here." His work is his life, and vice versa. I'm afraid his family's not seen too much of him over the years, and that's true of all river people. Henry Royce was such a person. His obsession was to build the world's finest and quietest motor car. At the time he started work on what was to become the world standard for excellence in automotive design and manufacture early in the 20th century, the automobile engine sounded like a modern clothes dryer filled with empty cans punctuated with gunshots. Royce was convinced that the parts of an internal combustion engine could be so finely manufactured to such exacting tolerances and so perfectly lubricated that the noise of their operation would be, or could be, barely perceptible to people standing nearby. He stalked about the plant in a nearly constant march. He would not take the time to eat, so a boy was hired to follow him around with a sandwich and a glass of milk. When Royce became sleepy, he would lie on a cot in the plant and take a nap. Then he was up again, examining everything. One day he overheard one of his engineers saying to a workman, "That's good enough," and Royce hit the ceiling. "It is not good enough," he shouted. "It's never good enough. We strive for perfection. Now, since that's impossible, it's never good enough. Find a way to make it better." I once toured the Rolls-Royce plant in London, and I was astonished by the care taken with imperfections that were invisible to me. Such care and dedication stood England in good stead during the Battle of Britain, when Rolls-Royce was turning out engines for Spitfire fighters. A beautiful stained-glass window over the entrance to the company's headquarters was given to the company by a grateful nation. Royce's unrelenting dedication is typical of the river person, and the great products and services of the world are usually due to such a person. Eastman of Kodak, Henry Ford, who accepted the challenge, which was at the time thought to be impossible, to produce a motor car for the working classes. Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line. Eli Whitney had done that with the manufacture of rifles, but Ford was the first to apply the system to the manufacture of automobiles. His genius for finding ways to cut costs and still produce a hard-working product was legendary. He raised the salaries of workers to a mind-boggling $5 a day, another feat never before equaled in the history of the Industrial Revolution. One of Ford's problems was that once he came up with a revolutionary idea, he was irrevocably fixed on it. The passage of time and changing economic conditions could not bring about changes in his way of thinking. But Henry Ford was a river person, and I'm sure you can think of many others. Perhaps you're a river person. Things aren't as simple and clear-cut as they once were. There's such a welter of possibilities, so many options. It can be difficult for a person to find his main interest in life. If we haven't found the work for which we're best fitted, there's usually an unresolved feeling of discontent with what we're doing. If we were true to ourselves, we'd say, I know this work is not the work for which I'm designed, and begin to explore in our spare time other lines of endeavor. Too often we're guided more by the pay scale than by a genuine feeling of interest in the work itself. Whatever our true line of work turns out to be, with the kind of 100% dedication and commitment we would give to it, it could produce anything we could possibly want. Sir William Osler, the great physician, was a river person, and he was speaking to other possible river people when he said, "Throw away, in the first place, all ambition beyond that of doing the day's work well. Find your way into work in which there's an enjoyment of it, and all shadows of annoyance seem to flee away. Let each day's work absorb your energy and satisfy your wildest ambition. Success in the long run depends on endurance and perseverance. All things come to him who has learned to labor and wait, whose talents develop in the still and quiet years of unselfish work." End quote. If you find yourself saying, "I must not be a river person," wait, think about it. Examine your life, your wants, your dreams, your daydreams, your visions, and look for a consistent key, a way in which you like to see yourself doing some particular thing as a form of work or service. A consistent daydream is often the projection of our inner intelligence trying to tell us what we should be doing. It may be that you're already in the general area you want to be in, but just haven't seen it in the light of its true possibilities. Discontented actors have found their rivers in directing, discontented salespeople in sales management, and vice versa. Every industry has within it hundreds, if not thousands, of possibilities. There's advertising and art and public relations and purchasing. The list goes on, but keep this in mind. If it's the right work for you, chances are you found yourself fooling around with it in your spare time in some way, or reading about it, or doodling about it, or visiting it in your free time. Look for a consistent interest. If you find it, you may have found your river. A river in carpentry is just as richly satisfying and fraught with the same possibilities as any other calling. If we cannot find a special interest in a particular line of work, then we no doubt should become goal people. There are those of us who seem to be able to do, with equal facility and with equal interest and enjoyment, many things. There are, for example, professional business executives who simply love the challenge of business. They can take an ailing company and within a few years raise it to a plateau among the leaders. What the company produces in the way of product or service doesn't seem to make very much difference. Lee Iacocca was known as an automobile man because of his many successful years at the Ford Motor Company. As such, he was asked to take over the Chrysler Corporation when it was in danger of complete collapse. That he did in a masterful, skillful way, that he risked his professional reputation in the process, was an indication of his confidence. The rest of the story is history, but Lee Iacocca might have done just as well taking over a corporation manufacturing toys or copiers or computers or whatever. Iacocca is a goal person. Now many will ask, well, why set goals at all? Why not just take things as they come and do your best with what you've been given to do? That been-given business is often a way of saying you stumbled into a chance opportunity for work and simply stayed there. A goal gives a picture to the human subconscious. Everyone has goals, whether he or she will admit it or not. Whatever you want to bring about in your life represents a goal. That dress in I. Magnan's window, that sports car, the condominium apartment in Florida, the home in Martha's Vineyard, the man or woman you want to date. Wants are goals. Without a goal, we're much like the man with a boat and nowhere to go. Goals give us the drive and energy we need to remain on the track long enough for their accomplishment. Like the captain of the ship about to leave port, we should be able to tell anyone our next port of call, and perhaps the one after that. If you've done much traveling at sea, you were perhaps surprised in the beginning by how slowly most large ships seem to move through the water. At a time when it's common for us to drive at 60 and 70 miles per hour and eat our lunch while tearing through the sky at 600 miles per hour, a ship pulling away from the dock and heading for a distant port at 20 knots may seem painfully slow indeed. But the ship moves steadily, 24 hours a day, always on course, and the cumulative effect of such relentless singleness of purpose delivers us at the next port of call in a surprisingly short time. One day we raise the distant shore, and soon we're in the harbor with mission accomplished. Now, after refueling, perhaps, and the scheduled stop, a new port of call must be determined. People with goals on which they've set their hearts and minds are always moving toward those goals. Even while we sleep, our deep minds are apparently working on the project. That's why we often awaken early in the morning with a solution to a problem that offered repeated resistance to our conscious attempts to solve it, clearly and simply in mind. It's interesting, and often quite astonishing, how people with goals tend to live longer than people without them. It's as though they can extend their lives simply because they have something to do. It must be the interest that lends vitality and energy to their lives. Cervantes wrote, "The journey is better than the inn." It's good to rest at the inn after a long journey, just as it's good for our ship to tie up at the dock for a few days' rest after a long sea voyage. But Cervantes was certainly right. The journey is better than the inn. Because the journey is life and experience. It puts us in the way of new interests and the most astonishing synchronicity. When a person knows where he or she is going and is engaged in getting there, the most amazing coincidences begin to take place. It's like reading something by Victor Hugo, in that the coincidences often take on the most outrageous appropriateness. Just as we're stumped, that one person with the answers happens along, or someone sends us the one book that has exactly the answer we're looking for. When we know where we're going and occupied on our journey, it seems as though all the forces, whatever they are, come to our aid. We're helped along by invisible as well as visible sources. This is not to say that we encounter nothing but smooth sailing. On the contrary, there's that door, of course, which is like a members-only sign outside an exclusive club. It seems to exist to prevent all but the 100%ers from gaining entrance to the winner's circle. Perseverance. Dogged, unflagging, repeatedly rejected perseverance is the answer, of course. And when we've set our heart and mind on something that is so important to us, we can generate that kind of persistence. The first step of the successful goal person is commitment. The person who's 100% committed to the achievement of a goal is quite willing to take whatever intermediate steps are necessary. The bridges are burned. There's no escape route on which to come tiptoeing back when things get rough. Commitment. 100%. When that happens, the goal is as good as accomplished, and you'll have fun and great experiences on the road to its achievement. In fact, the goal itself may come as an anticlimax, demanding the immediate setting of a new goal. People who know such a committed person and are privy to the goal also know that the person will reach it. They become silent and affirmative partners and often set in motion events that will help along the way. As we work to bring a difficult long-range goal into reality, we gradually grow into the kind of people to whom such a goal is a natural thing. That's because before we can do something, we must be something. And to me, this way we have of growing to fit the work, the social situation involved. The embodiment of superior achievement is a mind-boggling wonder. We actually become what we think about. And the key to it all is that it is each one of us who must do the thinking, and each of us has his own governor tied to his or her own innate capabilities. I could no more do the things the Iacocca does than those pelicans that fly past my balcony every afternoon could fly backwards. And I don't set the same goals Iacocca sets. I cannot set your goals any more than you can set mine. You're the only person alive who can set your goals, although others may inspire you from time to time to do more than you might have done without their encouragement. Encouragement is the function of a good leader, a coach, a mentor, or manager. The point I want to make here is that we all have basic and inherent genetic differences. I knew a corporal in the Marine Corps during World War II who could perform the most astonishing tricks with his mind, and whenever some kind of test was ordered, he easily outscored everyone else on the base, if not the entire Marine Corps. Both his mother and father were full professors at leading universities. He came from a long line of people with towering IQs, and as a result could think rings around most of the rest of us and do mathematical problems in his head that we couldn't have done under any circumstances. He had inherited a 16-cylinder brain, and our species needs such people for the special tasks they perform. There are also a lot of 8, 6, and 4-cylinder brains, and we need those too. And the most fascinating point of all of this is that regardless of the genetic equipment we've been handed, the goals we set and invariably reach when they're truly our goals and not the goals of a parent or acquaintance meet our desires perfectly. We're quite happy with them. Now that's why I've stressed that you examine your daydreams for signs of a repetitive picture. It may be the aiming point for the present, just as coughing is the only way the lungs can beg a smoker to stop destroying them. Our daydreams or habitual visions are often the way our inherent genetic mix is put together, and those dreams and visions are trying to tell us which way to go. They're often the projection of our inner voice, and that inner voice is based on very sound judgment about our true inherent capacities. The thing we must put aside in order to fulfill our unique possibilities is conformity. We all conform in hundreds of ways, even those of us who feel we've gone our own individual way in the world, who have lived more or less as free and independent spirits, are conformists to an extent that would no doubt surprise us if each of those ways was listed and printed out for us. But we need to recognize that there are ways in which we must not conform, and we need to recognize the fact that the tendency to conform to the standards of others without question is insidious and ever-present. There's a human tendency, no doubt acquired and strengthened in childhood, to believe that whatever people in significant numbers are doing must be correct, or so many of them wouldn't be doing it. That statement may never be spoken or thought of in just that way, but I'm sure you know what I mean. When I was a youngster, popular things were believed to be best. Florsheim shoes were thought to be the best, as were Hart, Schaffner, and Marx suits. Not that I ever owned either during that time. My father, and no doubt hundreds of thousands in similar situations, felt that Pontiac was the best car, but earlier it had been Buick. These were popular fads, which, unless one conformed to them, one simply wasn't in, or later hip. To flash the proper label indicated that you were knowledgeable about what to wear and drive. That was before Father took off for greener pastures. The fact is, they were all wrong. The popular, heavily advertised brands were fine and suited the great masses of people quite handily, but they really were not the best that money could buy. The great majority of people seldom enjoy the best of anything. They don't drink the best scotch or bourbon, wear the best clothes or shoes, or drive the best cars. The best is never the most popular. Now, I mention these things to establish the importance of questioning the things we do. Do we do them because they're what everybody else is doing, or because we've come to the conclusion that they're best for us and our personal journey into meaning? To young people, the need to belong is paramount. The group is the thing, and to be a member of the group, quite sufficient. So sufficient that one is quite willing to lose every vestige of individuality and take on the trappings, speech, and habits of the group. Oh, God, just let me belong is their unspoken prayer, and that's fine. It's their first true identity outside their families, and it's important to them. That it takes them far afield of what their parents traditionally expected is better yet. Outraging, or at least amazing their parents is an important part of the act, and of course it is an act. Just as the thousands on spring break inundate the Fort Lauderdale, Florida waterfront like a herd of white-faced Herefords, virtually indistinguishable from one another, they're expressing their break with the polite routine of the family in their younger days. They're expressing their freedom from the family and with all other rules of human conduct by joining another group. They're still as individually faceless as they were before, perhaps more so, but this passage rite is important to them. Fine. But then it's time for each of them to find his and her own pathway in the world, and it's my observation that very few of them do. They've simply left one group and joined another, and while they will soon put aside such childish and primitive activity, chances are they'll still represent a group and act in most ways in unison. They will tend to live in tract homes or condominium apartments with all the charm and creative touches of army barracks, and spend their entire lives taking their cues from those in their peer group. A good rule to follow is, whatever the majority of people are doing, under any given circumstance, if you will do the exact opposite, you will probably never make another mistake as long as you live. We need to calm down, relax more, smile more. Pick that spot on the fairway or on the green where you want that lovely little ball to land, and then, when you're ready, hit the ball. River person or goal person, and sometimes a combination of both, is the way to go. Using our intuition along with our intelligence as a guide can be the best way to produce really super ideas. Make it a habit to carry a folded sheet of paper along with a writing instrument at all times during the day. Ideas have a habit of making their appearance at unexpected times, in the shower, while driving the car, while having a meal. Watch for them at breakfast and lunchtime particularly, while taking a walk. Whenever the mind is in neutral, as I call it, ideas have an opportunity to bubble up to the surface and show themselves off. We won't always get our best ideas during think time, but by planting the problem we're working on deep in our minds, it seems that the great subterranean part of our mind works on the idea when we're doing other things. When it hits on a possible answer, it waits for a quiet time to slip it to the top for evaluation. Those ideas should be immediately written down for serious consideration. I believe that our intuition has a way of plumbing our racial memory, or searching what Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere, an invisible layer of human intelligence that forms a mantle around the earth. How it works is a mystery. That it does work, we've all demonstrated at times during our lives. Planting a problem or question deep in the subconscious by first turning it every which way during an in-depth conscious attempt to solve it usually results in the answer eventually appearing completely unbidden in our consciousness. Of course, we often say, it's so obvious. But it was not obvious when we rotated it on the rotisserie of our consciousness. It seems to happen with more frequency for those who count on its happening, who expect it and watch for it, as a ship's lookout watches for a light in the darkness. Women tend to be better at this than men. They seem to live closer to their intuition. Perhaps it's because they've historically had to, since they lack the physical strength to challenge men on a more basic level. I took my grandson to lunch recently. He's 10 years old. As we walked to the car afterward, there were some young men working with picks and shovels and jackhammers in what appeared to be the demolition of a service station. They were surrounded by dense clouds of cement dust as, stripped to the waist, they wielded their jackhammer, heavy picks, and shoveled the broken concrete. I stopped, and pointing to the young workman, asked Danny if that's the kind of work he wanted to do when he grew up. He watched them quietly for a moment and then shook his head. In the car, I explained to Danny that when men and women perform purely physical work, they're not utilizing their greatest resource. Thinking men and women are using their resources in the proper order. We can think better, more profitably, and serve more people through ideas than we can ever do physically. And it's better for our health, too. Then we have the joy of using our physical bodies for more agreeable pursuits: tennis, golf, sailing, fishing, swimming, camping, hiking, mountain climbing, running, exercising. Ideas, the great ideas that move us to be better and greater than we now are the deeply embedded anchors that will hold us in place steadfastly when the great storms of life crash about us. They're the anchors that prevent our being intimidated or diverted from our path by expediency, fad, or demagoguery. Great ideas provide us with a set of sensors that can pick up the dishonest and the phony, revealing the cheap and shoddy and the so-called quick buck. Great ideas provide a lifelong security system for us without disturbing our sense of humor. In fact, our sense of humor is greatly enriched by such ideas, and smiling and laughter become important parts of our days. We're by no means immune to mistakes, but we understand that they're a natural part of growth and reaching into the unknown. The ideas we hold should be in concert with our goals if our goals are to be successfully achieved. We say, I have an idea. What is that? It's surely more than a neurochemical electrical response, although it's that too. An idea is the bringing together of known increments to provide a new result. Let's go to the beach, someone says. Without a moment's hesitation, we take the known beach factor, add it to existing transportation facilities, the proper clothing, possibly a picnic lunch, and suggest the resulting idea to those we're with at the time. It all happens instantaneously, although all sorts of interconnections are going on in our brains. The greater our general information, the more combinations we can put together, and the greater the reach of our possibility thinking, as Dr. Robert Schuller calls it. That's why young people should think twice before complaining about school courses they'll never use as adults. All information of a positive kind has value when we're formulating ideas. When we set an important goal for ourselves, we present to our mind a problem to be solved, a challenge to be successfully fulfilled. Instantly, far down in the labyrinthine interstices of its vast potential, the mind goes to work to find the information we need to turn that idea into reality. We commonly use this astonishing ability for ordinary things. For example, the idea of obtaining a particular automobile soon becomes a true automobile we can drive and wash on warm Sunday afternoons. Perhaps our path from inception of the idea to the time we get into the automobile, turn on the key, and drive away is rather tortuous, even circular, leading first here and then there. More often than not, we get in our own way by doubting the suggestions that filter into our consciousness, only to discover later that they would have been marvelous shortcuts and simplifications of the process if we'd only heeded them. But eventually, the idea, the invisible idea, becomes sheet steel and glass and upholstery and rubber, and from time to time a pain in the neck as well. The idea has become real in our lives, even if it takes 3 years to pay for it. We become what we think about, but the thinking is up to us, and the degree to which people regularly underestimate their capacity for accomplishment is immeasurable. Curiously, we think nothing of the accomplishments of others. That is, what others do we tend to take in stride. But when it comes to setting goals for ourselves, we tend to play things outrageously safe, and thus remain within limits embarrassingly small. Especially if there's some sort of maintenance program in effect. That is, if we have a job, though its real demands upon us are minimal, we will usually shut down any other efforts to prepare ourselves for 1, a much better, more interesting kind of work, or 2, any sudden emergency that might develop. I remember watching a television news program in which laid-off workers of a closed Navy yard were being interviewed. The announcer asked, "Well, what are you men going to do now that the Navy Yard is closed down?" The man nearest to him said, "Well, I guess we'll just have to wait for it to reopen again." Another man said, "Oh, I've worked in this Navy Yard for 25 years. I don't know anything else." Here were human cattle that could graze in only one pasture, if we're to believe them, and now that the pasture was no longer there, they'd simply sit down and waste away. In 25 years, in his spare time, a person could learn to do heart transplants. What were all these people doing with the 16 hours a day they were not working? What about weekends and vacations? Take a pen and paper and work out the number of hours the average working person is actually on the job during a typical year. Then subtract it from the rest of his or her waking time. If an hour a day were devoted to learning, to doing anything of a valuable nature, the ending of a job would be an incidental thing, perhaps an actual benefit. And how about think time? Any man who is responsible for providing for his family should have emergency plans A, B, and C, at least A. Just as a platoon leader in combat must ask himself, what if the enemy attacks at night, from the rear, on Sunday morning during breakfast? The family provider should ask and work out on that legal pad what to do if the company I work for goes out of business, or lets me go for any reason, or moves to Europe. It's the kind of thinking that a man and his wife can do together as well as separately, and, as a result, have several possible courses of action. And in the meantime, How about that educational program in my main field of interest? I certainly don't want to be as dumb 5 years from now as I am today. But the Navy Yard workers that were interviewed on that television program were just as dumb as they'd been 20 years before.